For over a century, steam locomotives were the iron giants that built America, hauling freight across mountains and passengers across prairies. These mechanical marvels represented the cutting edge of 19th and early 20th century technology. Today, we're diving into everything you need to know about American steam locomotives, the dawn of American steam power. The story of American steam locomotives begins in the early 1830s, when the United States was still a young nation finding its footing on the world stage. The country stretched primarily along the eastern seaboard, with vast territories to the west remaining largely unexplored and disconnected. Transportation relied heavily on horses, wagons, canals, and sailing vessels, methods that were slow, expensive, and often unreliable. The introduction of steam-powered railways would change everything, transforming not just how Americans traveled, but the very fabric of the nation itself. The first successful steam locomotive to operate in America was the Best Friend of Charleston, which made its inaugural run in December 1830 on the South Carolina Canal and Railroad Company line. This marked a pivotal moment in American history. While steam locomotives had already been operating in England for several years, American engineers quickly recognized that these machines would need significant modifications to handle the unique challenges of the American landscape. Unlike the well-established infrastructure of Europe, America had rough terrain, tight curves, and tracks that were often hastily constructed with lighter materials. American locomotive designers responded with innovation and creativity. They developed engines with swiveling front trucks that could navigate sharper curves, added cow catchers to clear obstacles from the tracks, and installed large enclosed cabs to protect crews from harsh weather conditions. These practical modifications gave American locomotives their distinctive appearance and made them better suited for the challenging environment they would encounter. Throughout the 1830s and 1840s, railway construction exploded across the eastern United States. Small railway companies sprouted up in nearly every major city and town, each hoping to connect their community to the growing network of steel rails. The economic advantages became immediately apparent. Goods that once took weeks to transport by wagon could now reach their destination in days. Passengers could travel distances in hours that previously required exhausting multi-day journeys. The efficiency gains were staggering, and investors poured money into railway ventures. The revolutionary impact of steam locomotives on American expansion cannot be overstated. Before the railway age, the vast interior of the continent represented an almost insurmountable barrier to settlement and commerce. The Great Plains, Rocky Mountains, and Western Territories seemed impossibly distant from the established population centers in the east. Steam locomotives changed this calculation entirely. Suddenly, crossing 1,000 miles became feasible, not just for hardy pioneers, but for ordinary families, merchants, and farmers seeking new opportunities. Railways became the catalyst for westward expansion in ways that no other technology could match. Towns and cities sprang up along railway lines, often in locations that had no natural advantages beyond their position on the tracks. Agricultural regions in the Midwest could now ship grain to eastern markets efficiently, making large-scale farming economically viable. Mining operations in remote mountain regions could extract valuable resources and transport them to industrial centers. The steel rails became arteries of commerce, pumping life and prosperity into previously isolated regions. The strategic importance of railways became abundantly clear during the 1860s, when the network of rail lines played a decisive role in major historical events. The ability to move troops, supplies, and equipment quickly over long distances provided significant advantages. Railway hubs became targets of strategic importance, and controlling key rail junctions often determined the outcome of campaigns. This period demonstrated that steam locomotives were not merely commercial ventures, they were instruments of national power and unity. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869 stands as one of the most significant achievements in American history. When the final spike was driven at Promontory Summit in Utah Territory, connecting the eastern and western rail networks, it symbolized the fulfillment of a national vision. The journey from New York to California, which had previously taken months by wagon or ship, could now be completed in less than a week. This single achievement effectively knit the nation together, making the idea of a truly united country stretching from ocean to ocean a practical reality rather than an abstract concept. The golden age of American steam locomotives stretched from these pioneering days of the 1830s through to the 1950s. more than a century of continuous development and refinement. During this remarkable period, steam locomotive technology advanced dramatically. Early locomotives were relatively small and simple machines, often weighing just a few tons and capable of pulling modest loads at speeds of 20 to 30 miles per hour. By the 1940s, the largest steam locomotives weighed over 1 million pounds and could haul trains stretching more than a mile long at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour. This evolution reflected the growing demands placed on American railways. As the nation industrialized, the appetite for raw materials and manufactured goods grew exponentially. Coal fields in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Wyoming needed to ship millions of tons of fuel to power plants and factories. Steel mills required constant supplies of iron ore from Minnesota's Mesabi Range. Agricultural regions produced such abundant harvests that moving grain became a logistical challenge, requiring ever larger and more powerful locomotives. The railway companies responded by pushing the boundaries of steam technology. Engineers designed increasingly sophisticated locomotives with multiple sets of driving wheels, articulated frames that could handle curves despite their enormous size, and superheated steam systems that extracted maximum efficiency from every pound of coal burned. The names of these machines, Mikado, Berkshire, Northern, Challenger, Big Boy, entered the American vocabulary and captured the public imagination. Throughout this golden age, steam locomotives became deeply woven into American culture and identity. The sound of a steam whistle echoing across the countryside, the sight of smoke billowing from a locomotive stack, and the rhythmic chuffing of exhaust from the cylinders became quintessentially American experiences. Railway stations served as community gathering places where people witnessed the arrival of mail, newspapers, goods, and travelers from distant places. The locomotive engineer became a figure of respect and admiration, trusted with the responsibility of operating these powerful machines safely and efficiently. As we explore the various aspects of American steam locomotives in this video, keep in mind that these machines represented far more than mechanical engineering achievements. They were instruments of transformation that reshaped geography, economics, society, and the American experience itself. The legacy of the steam era continues to influence our nation today, even though the last commercial steam locomotive made its final run decades ago. Evolution and development. The birth of American steam design. When the first steam locomotives arrived in America from England in the early 1830s, railway engineers quickly discovered that these imported machines were poorly suited for American conditions. The English locomotives had been designed for a very different environment, one with well-established infrastructure, gently graded routes, and carefully maintained tracks built to exacting standards. American railways, by contrast, were often constructed hastily with whatever materials were locally available, featuring sharp curves, steep grades, and track that might include anything from iron rails to wooden beams topped with iron straps. The Stourbridge Lion, imported from England in 1829, illustrates this problem perfectly. When this locomotive attempted its trial run in Pennsylvania, it proved too heavy for the light track structure and too rigid to navigate the sharp curves of the American railway. The machine was quickly retired, never to operate commercially. This failure taught American engineers a crucial lesson. They would need to develop their own locomotive designs specifically tailored to American conditions. John Jervis, an engineer working for the Mohawk and Hudson Railroad, created one of the most important early innovations in 1832. He designed a locomotive with a four-wheel swiveling truck mounted under the front of the engine. This pivoting assembly allowed the locomotive to navigate curves that would have derailed more rigid designs. The concept was brilliantly simple by letting the front wheels follow the track. Independently, while the main driving wheels provided power, the locomotive gained flexibility without sacrificing stability. This innovation became a standard feature of American locomotive design and contributed significantly to the distinctive appearance of American engines. Another uniquely American feature was the pilot, commonly known as the cowcatcher. This V-shaped device mounted on the front of the locomotive served a practical purpose in a nation where railways often crossed open range and livestock wandered freely. The pilot would deflect obstacles off the track rather than allowing them to cause derailments. European railways, with their fenced rights-of-way and controlled environments, had no need for such devices. The cowcatcher became an iconic symbol of American locomotives, featured prominently in paintings, photographs, and popular culture. American locomotives also developed larger smoke boxes and distinctive bell-mouth smokestacks compared to their European counterparts. These features weren't merely aesthetic choices, they served important functions. The larger smoke boxes provided more space for spark arresters, devices that trapped burning embers before they could escape and start fires along the right-of-way. This was particularly important in America, where railways often passed through dry grasslands and forests. The flared smokestacks helped create better draft for the fire, while also adding to the spark arresting capability. Together, these features gave American locomotives their characteristic appearance. As decades passed, technological improvements transformed steam locomotives from relatively simple machines into sophisticated pieces of engineering. In the 1840s and 1850s, most locomotives burned wood as fuel, which was plentiful along American railways. Engineers designed elaborate systems to maximize efficiency, including better boiler designs that extracted more heat from the fire. The introduction of coal firing in the 1860s and 1870s brought significant changes, as coal provided much more energy per pound than wood and reduced the frequency of fuel stops. The development of superheating technology in the early 1900s represented a major breakthrough. Superheaters took steam from the boiler and passed it through tubes in the smokebox, heating it to much higher temperatures before sending it to the cylinders. This superheated steam contained significantly more energy and reduced condensation problems that plagued earlier locomotives. The efficiency gains were remarkable. Superheated locomotives could do the same work while burning substantially less fuel. Compound expansion systems, where steam would power one set of cylinders at high pressure and then be routed to larger low pressure cylinders to extract additional energy, appeared on some American locomotives in the late 1800s. While this technology proved popular in Europe, American railways generally favored simpler, more robust designs that were easier to maintain in remote locations. The American approach emphasized reliability and ease of repair over maximum theoretical efficiency. Understanding wheel arrangements, the white notation system, to make sense of the incredible variety of steam locomotive designs. We need to understand the classification system that railways used to describe them. The white notation, named after Frederick White, who standardized it in the early 1900s, provides a simple numerical code that tells you everything about a locomotive S-wheel arrangement at a glance. The system works by counting wheels in groups from front to back. The first number represents the small leading wheels mounted on the front truck, which guide the locomotive through curves. The second number indicates the large driving wheels that actually power the locomotive. These are the wheels connected to the pistons and rods that convert steam power into motion. The third number counts the trailing wheels at the rear, which support the weight of the firebox and cab. For example, a locomotive with the designation 462 has 4 leading wheels, 6 driving wheels, and 2 trailing wheels. If you see a locomotive classified as 284, you know immediately that it has 2 leading wheels, 8 driving wheels, and 4 trailing wheels. This system makes it easy to visualize the basic layout of any steam locomotive just from its classification number. The 440 wheel arrangement earned the nickname American because it became the quintessential locomotive design for 19th century American railways. This configuration featured 4 leading wheels for good tracking through curves, 4 driving wheels to provide power, and no trailing wheels. The design offered an excellent balance of flexibility, power, and simplicity. Thousands of these locomotives were built between the 1850s and 1890s, and they handled everything from passenger trains to freight service. When you see old photographs or paintings of Civil War rear railways, you're almost certainly looking at a 440 American-type locomotive. The 282 arrangement, called the Mikado, represented a shift toward locomotives designed specifically for heavy freight service. With 8 driving wheels instead of 4, these locomotives could pull much heavier loads while distributing their weight over more wheels to avoid damaging light track. The 2 leading wheels provided adequate guidance, while the 2 trailing wheels supported a larger firebox. These locomotives became workhorses for freight service across America from the 1900s through the end of the steam era. When railways needed to move fast, heavy passenger trains, they turned to locomotives like the 484 Northern. This arrangement combined 8 powerful driving wheels with 4 leading wheels for smooth, high-speed running and for trailing wheels to support a huge firebox capable of generating enormous amounts of steam. The Northern type could sustain speeds above 80 miles per hour, while pulling full passenger consists over mountain grades. These magnificent machines represented the pinnacle of conventional steam locomotive design. For truly extraordinary hauling power, railways developed articulated locomotives like the 4664 Challenger and the massive 4-8-8-4 Big Boy. These arrangements indicate locomotives with two separate sets of driving wheels connected by flexible joints. The Challenger had two groups of 6 driving wheels each, while the Big Boy had two groups of 8 driving wheels each. This articulation allowed enormously long locomotives to navigate curves that would be impossible for rigid designs of similar size. The Big Boy locomotives, built specifically for Union Pacific's mountain grades, remained the largest steam locomotives ever constructed, weighing over 1 million pounds and capable of pulling trains more than a mile long. Each wheel arrangement represented careful engineering compromises between competing demands. More driving wheels meant more power, but also more weight and mechanical complexity. Leading wheels improved high-speed stability, but added length and weight without contributing to pulling power. Trailing wheels allowed larger fireboxes, but required longer, heavier frames. Railway mechanical departments chose wheel arrangements based on their specific needs, the grades they needed to climb, the speeds they needed to maintain, and the loads they needed to haul. Famous locomotives and classes, icons of American railroading. Among the thousands of steam locomotive designs that operated across America, certain machines achieved legendary status through their exceptional performance, innovative design, or sheer impressive scale. These locomotives captured the public imagination and became symbols of American engineering prowess. The Union Pacific Big Boy stands as the ultimate expression of steam locomotive gigantism. 25 of these colossal machines were built by the American Locomotive Company between 1941 and 1944, and they remain the largest steam locomotives ever constructed for regular service. To truly appreciate the scale of a Big Boy, consider that each locomotive weighed over 1,200,000 pounds without its tender, measured more than 132 feet in length, and stood over 16 feet tall. The boiler alone could hold 20,000 gallons of water at operating pressure. Union Pacific commissioned these giants for a specific purpose, hauling heavy freight trains over the challenging grades of the Wasatch Mountains between Ogden, Utah, and Green River, Wyoming. The route included a particularly demanding section known as the Wasatch, featuring long grades that tested the limits of existing locomotives. The Big Boys solved this problem through sheer power. Their articulated design, with two sets of 8 driving wheels each, allowed them to navigate the curves of mountain railroading while generating enough force to pull trains weighing 6,000 tons up steep grades without requiring helper locomotives. The articulation meant the front engine could pivot independently from the rear engine, giving these massive machines surprising flexibility. 8 of these remarkable locomotives survive today in museums, and Union Pacific has even restored one, number 4014, to operating condition for excursion service. Moving to the eastern United States, the Pennsylvania Railroad K4 Pacific represented a very different philosophy of locomotive design, where the Big Boy emphasized raw power for freight service. The K4 was crafted specifically for fast, reliable passenger service. The Pennsylvania Railroad, which called itself the Standard Railroad of the world, operated the busiest passenger routes in America, and the K4 became the backbone of this service from 1914 through the 1950s. These 462 locomotives combined grace with capability, capable of whisking passengers along at 70 miles per hour or more while maintaining punctual schedules. The Pennsylvania Railroad built 425K for locomotives, and they became so successful that the railroad saw no need to replace them with more modern designs for decades. Engineers and passengers alike praised the K4 for its smooth-running characteristics and dependability. The design included features that enhanced passenger comfort, such as careful balancing to minimize vibration, and sophisticated suspension systems that provided steady riding at high speeds. 2 K4 locomotives survive in preservation, standing as monuments to an era when passenger trains dominated intercity travel and the Pennsylvania Railroad ruled the rails of the populous Northeast. The New York Central Hudson, officially designated as the J-Class, earned fame as one of the most elegant and capable passenger locomotives ever designed. These 464 machines were built specifically to handle the railroad's premier passenger trains, including the famous 20th Century Limited that connected New York and Chicago. the New York Central operated routes that were remarkably flat compared to most American railways. Taking advantage of the natural water level grade along the Hudson River and across upstate New York, this favorable topography allowed the railroad to prioritize speed over climbing ability. The Hudson-type locomotives excelled at sustained high-speed running. Their streamlined casings applied to some examples in the late 1930s, reduced air resistance, and gave them a modern, sophisticated appearance that matched the luxurious passenger cars they pulled. The four-wheel leading truck provided excellent stability at speed. The six driving wheels delivered ample power, and the four-wheel trailing truck supported a large firebox that could maintain steam production during hours of continuous hard running. The sight of a streamlined Hudson racing along the Hudson River Valley, its driving wheels spinning at hundreds of revolutions per minute, represented American passenger railroading at its finest. On the opposite coast, the Southern Pacific GS4 daylight locomotives achieved similar fame through a combination of outstanding performance and spectacular appearance. Southern Pacific ordered these 484 locomotives specifically to power their premier passenger train, the Coast Daylight, which operated between Los Angeles and San Francisco along one of the most scenic routes in America. The railroad dressed these locomotives in a stunning paint scheme featuring bright orange, red, and black with silver striping, making them instantly recognizable and photogenic. Beyond their beautiful appearance, the GS4 locomotives were thoroughbreds, capable of maintaining passenger train schedules that required sustained speeds of 70 to 80 miles per hour over challenging coastal grades. The locomotive designation GS stood for Golden State, while the number 4 indicated this was the fourth iteration of the design, each version incorporating improvements based on operational experience. These machines demonstrated that steam locomotives could be both powerful workhorses and works of art. One GS4, number 4449, remains operational today and continues to thrill crowds at special events, still wearing its distinctive daylight colors. How steam locomotives work, the mechanics of steam power. Understanding how steam locomotives convert fuel and water into motion requires examining several interconnected systems working in harmony. At the heart of every steam locomotive sits the boiler, which is essentially a large pressure vessel filled with water and penetrated by tubes through which hot gases from the fire pass. Think of the boiler as the locomotive's powerhouse, where the chemical energy stored in fuel transforms into thermal energy that heats water until it becomes high-pressure steam. The firebox sits at the rear of the boiler, enclosed within the boiler shell itself. This is where combustion occurs, whether the fuel is coal, oil, or in earlier times wood. The firebox has thick walls and a crown sheet at the top that must remain covered with water at all times. If the water level drops and exposes the crown sheet to direct flame, the metal can weaken and fail catastrophically, which is why maintaining proper water level was one of the fireman's most critical responsibilities. The firebox doors allow the firemen to add fuel, and careful firing technique could make the difference between efficient operation and wasteful fuel consumption. Hot gases from the fire travel forward through tubes that run the length of the boiler, transferring heat to the water surrounding them. These fire tubes might number in the hundreds, creating enormous surface area for heat transfer. As the gases exit the front of the boiler, they enter the smoke box, where they are channeled up through the smokestack. The exhaust steam from the cylinders also enters the smoke box, where it creates a partial vacuum that draws air through the fire, maintaining combustion intensity. This ingenious self-regulating system means that when the locomotive works harder and uses more steam, the increased exhaust automatically provides more draft to the fire, generating more steam to meet the demand. Steam generated in the boiler accumulates in the steam dome, typically the highest point of the boiler where the driest steam collects. From there, steam travels through pipes to the cylinders, which are usually mounted on either side of the locomotive near the front. Inside each cylinder, a piston moves back and forth as high-pressure steam alternately pushes it in each direction. Valves control when steam enters and exits each end of the cylinder, timed precisely so the pistons deliver smooth, continuous power. The pistons connect to driving wheels through a system of rods and cranks that convert the back-and-forth motion into rotary motion. The main rod connects directly from each piston to a crank pin on one of the main driving wheels. Side rods then connect all the driving wheels on each side together, ensuring they rotate in unison. This arrangement distributes the power across all driving wheels and prevents one wheel from slipping, while others maintain traction. Watching these rods in motion, flashing back and forth with precision timing, provides one of the most mesmerizing sights in mechanical engineering. The choice between coal and oil as fuel significantly affected locomotive design and operation. Coal firing required a fireman to shovel fuel into the firebox throughout the journey, a physically demanding task that required skill to maintain consistent steam pressure. The fireman had to distribute coal evenly across the grate, break up clinkers that formed from impurities, and adjust firing rate based on the locomotive's power demands. Coal-burning locomotives needed ash pans beneath the firebox to collect waste, and regular stops were necessary to remove accumulated ash and clinkers. Oil firing, more common in regions like California, where oil was plentiful and coal expensive, simplified the fireman's job considerably. Oil burners sprayed atomized fuel into the firebox, where it burned with intense heat and produced minimal ash. The fireman controlled fuel flow with valves rather than wielding a shovel, making the work less physically exhausting. Oil-fired locomotives could also be fired up more quickly from a cold start and maintained more consistent temperatures. However, oil firing required reliable fuel supplies and specialized fueling facilities, which limited its adoption in many regions. Water management presented equally important challenges. Steam locomotives consumed water at prodigious rates. Large locomotive working hard might use 15,000 gallons in an hour. The tender, the car, coupled directly behind the locomotive, served primarily as a water tank, though it also carried fuel. Tender capacity determined how far a locomotive could run between water stops, a crucial consideration for route planning. In arid western regions, railways built water towers at strategic intervals, and water stops became important operational constraints that timetable makers had to accommodate when scheduling trains. Railroad companies and their fleets, regional giants, and their distinctive approaches. The landscape of American railroading was dominated by several major companies, each developing its own engineering philosophy and locomotive preferences based on the unique challenges of their operating territories. These railroad companies were not merely transportation providers, they were massive industrial enterprises that maintained their own locomotive design departments, manufacturing facilities, and engineering standards. The Union Pacific Railroad operated across some of the most challenging terrain in North America, stretching from the Midwest across the Great Plains and over the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific coast. This geography demanded locomotives capable of hauling heavy freight over mountain grades while also covering vast distances across relatively flat prairie. Union Pacific became famous for embracing massive articulated locomotives, culminating in the big boy design we discussed earlier. The railroad's mechanical department worked closely with locomotive manufacturers to develop machines specifically tailored to their demanding routes. Union Pacific also operated large fleets of Challenger-type locomotives and various other powerful designs, always prioritizing raw hauling capacity over refinement. The Pennsylvania Railroad represented an entirely different approach to locomotive engineering. Operating in the densely populated Northeast with relatively gentle grades, the Pennsylvania focused on passenger service and high-speed freight operations. The railroad maintained such exacting standards that it earned the nickname the Standard Railroad of the World. Pennsylvania Railroad took great pride in standardization, developing successful designs like the K4 Pacific and then building hundreds of nearly identical copies. This standardization philosophy extended throughout their operations, making maintenance more efficient and allowing parts to be interchangeable across large fleets. The railroad even operated its own locomotive construction facility at Altoona, Pennsylvania, where skilled craftsmen built locomotives to specifications that often exceeded industry standards. Southern Pacific faced yet another set of unique challenges. Operating from Oregon through California and across the desert Southwest to Louisiana, the railroad dealt with extreme variations in climate, terrain, and operating conditions. In California, abundant oil supplies and the fire hazard presented by dry conditions made oil-burning locomotives the logical choice. Southern Pacific developed extensive expertise in oil firing technology and converted most of their fleet to burn petroleum rather than coal. The railroad's mountain crossing at Donner Pass required powerful locomotives capable of sustained climbing, while their flat desert routes in Arizona and New Mexico demanded machines that could run for hours without water stops. This diversity of requirements led Southern Pacific to operate an unusually varied fleet that included everything from massive articulated freight locomotives to the beautiful daylight passenger engines. Norfolk and Western Railroad. Based in Virginia and operating throughout the coal-rich Appalachian region, took perhaps the most conservative approach to motive power. While most American railroads eagerly embraced diesel locomotives in the late 1940s and 1950s, Norfolk and Western continued building new steam locomotives into 1953 and operated steam in mainline service until 1960. This made economic sense for a railroad that hauled coal. Their fuel was literally the product they transported, available at minimal cost. Norfolk and Western developed highly refined and efficient steam locomotive designs, particularly their J-class passenger locomotives and A-class articulated freight engines. These machines represented the final evolution of American steam technology, incorporating every lesson learned over more than a century of development. Regional variations in locomotive design reflected not just geography, but also the industrial culture and engineering traditions of different areas. Western railroads generally favored rugged, powerful machines built to withstand harsh conditions and minimal maintenance facilities in remote locations. Eastern railroads often specified more refined locomotives with sophisticated features, operating in regions with established maintenance infrastructure and skilled workforce. Southern railroads dealt with heat, humidity, and different coal characteristics that influenced their locomotive specifications. These regional preferences created fascinating diversity in American steam locomotive design, with experienced observers often able to identify a locomotive's home railroad just from its distinctive features: the decline, the diesel revolution, and the end of an era. The transition from steam to diesel-electric locomotives represented one of the most rapid and complete technological changes in transportation history. While steam locomotives had dominated American railroads for over a century, diesel-electric power displaced them almost entirely within just 2 decades, fundamentally transforming railroad operations. Diesel-electric locomotives had existed since the early 1900s, but they remained relegated to specialized switching duties for decades. The breakthrough came in the late 1930s when the Electromotive Corporation, later the Electromotive Division of General Motors, developed reliable high-horsepower diesel-electric locomotives suitable for mainline service. These machines used diesel engines to generate electricity, which then powered electric motors connected to the wheels. This arrangement provided smooth, controllable power across a wide speed range. The economic advantages of diesel-electric locomotives became increasingly apparent during the 1940s. A diesel locomotive could operate continuously for days with minimal servicing, while steam locomotives required water stops every 100 miles or so and extensive daily maintenance. Diesel units could be operated in multiple unit configurations, with several locomotives controlled by a single crew, effectively multiplying available power without proportionally increasing labor costs. The thermal efficiency of diesel engines far exceeded that of steam locomotives, meaning diesel units consumed less fuel to produce equivalent work. Labor considerations also favored diesel adoption. Steam locomotives required a crew of at least 2 engineer and a fireman, and the physically demanding nature of firing a steam locomotive made recruitment increasingly difficult in the post-war era. Diesel locomotives eliminated the fireman's position on most freight operations, reducing crew costs. The maintenance workforce required for diesel locomotives was smaller and required different skills than the craftsmen who maintained steam power, skills that proved easier to train as the traditional knowledge base of steam locomotive maintenance began disappearing. Environmental and operational factors accelerated the transition. Steam locomotives produced prodigious amounts of smoke, ash, and cinders that created public relations problems in urban areas and required constant cleaning of facilities and equipment. Diesel locomotives ran clean, requiring no ash disposal and producing minimal visible emissions. Steam locomotives also posed fire hazards, particularly in dry western regions where sparks from smokestacks could ignite devastating fires. Insurance companies and regulatory agencies increasingly favored the cleaner, safer diesel technology. The major railroads began large-scale dieselization programs in the late 1940s. By 1950, diesel locomotives handled a significant portion of American rail traffic. The pace accelerated throughout the 1950s as railroads retired steam locomotives faster than they wore out. often scrapping relatively young and capable machines simply because diesel operation proved more economical. The Pennsylvania Railroad, once a bastion of steam power, operated its last steam locomotive in regular service in 1957. The Union Pacific, despite investing in the massive big boy locomotives just 15 years earlier, completed desalinization by 1959. Norfolk and Western stood as the last major American railroad operating steam locomotives in significant numbers, finally retiring their last steam locomotives from regular service in May 1960. A few smaller railroads and industrial operations continued using steam into the early 1960s. But by 1961, the steam era had essentially ended on American Class I railroads. The transition happened so quickly that many perfectly functional steam locomotives went directly from active service to the scrapyard, their boilers still capable of producing steam and their machinery still in good working order. Legacy and preservation keeping the flame alive. Despite the wholesale retirement of steam locomotives from commercial service, a remarkable preservation movement ensured that future generations would still experience these magnificent machines. Today, dozens of operational steam locomotives survive, maintained by dedicated organizations and individuals who keep alive the skills and knowledge required to operate and maintain these complex machines. Several significant operational steam locomotives tour the country on special excursion trains. Union Pacific maintains Big Boy number 4014 and Challenger number 3985 for operation on special occasions, making these among the largest operational steam locomotives in the world. The Milwaukee Road 261, a 484 Northern type, operates excursions throughout the Midwest. The Nickel Plate Road 765, another powerful 484, provides steam excursion service across multiple states. These operations allow modern audiences to experience the sights, sounds, and sensations of steam railroading, creating connections across generations. Museum collections preserve hundreds of additional locomotives, many displayed in settings that honor their historical significance. The California State Railroad Museum houses an exceptional collection, including Southern Pacific's cab-forward articulated locomotives, unique machines designed to operate with the cab at the front rather than the rear. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Museum displays some of the earliest American locomotives alongside later designs, illustrating the evolution of the technology. The National Railroad Museum in Green River, Wyoming preserves several big boy locomotives, while the Henry Ford Museum in Michigan maintains historic locomotives representing different eras of development. Smaller operations throughout the country maintain tourist railroads and heritage lines where steam locomotives operate regular seasonal schedules. These operations range from narrow-gauge mountain railroads to standard-gauge lines that recreate the experience of branch line railroading. They serve important educational purposes while also providing economic benefits to their communities through heritage tourism. The cultural impact of steam locomotives extends far beyond preserved machines and museum displays. Steam locomotives occupy a special place in American cultural memory, symbolizing industrial might, westward expansion, and a romantic era of travel. They appear in countless films, photographs, paintings, and stories. Model railroading remains a popular hobby, largely because of the enduring fascination with steam locomotives. The sounds of a steam whistle or the sight of smoke and steam evoke powerful nostalgia, even among people too young to remember. Regular steam operations, suggesting that these machines have achieved a kind of timeless, iconic status in the American imagination.